For 60 leagues the forest is wilderness, and for 60 leagues does the demon reign over. His voice is the deluge, his speech is fire, and his breath is death.
Gilgamesh.
The bickerings of the elders tightens my brow. The wails of my mother chills my bones. The cowardice of my brother breaks my heart. Yet the face of that demon, well now, that does put a smile on my face. The elders trembled when they beheld their king. Ever since he had announced he would be venturing into the wilderness, into the great unknown, into the land reserved for the demon Humbaba, the elders gazed upon their king like it was the last time they'd see him again. Yet they had done all that they could do to dissuade him from his folly. They had advised him, and when that did not work, they had pleaded with him, and when that had not worked, they had begged. Still, nothing could change the mind of their great king, not even the words of his newfound brother. "This is folly," Enkidu told him, which was more than most were allowed to tell him. Folly? Gilgamesh was crunching something between his teeth. Could have been food, could have been dust, could have been someone's bones for all the elders knew. Surely now, folly would be not to do it. After all, I've made such a show of it now that backing out would be an act of cowardice, and a king can't be a coward. It was true, as far as the elders could tell. Gilgamesh had allowed his mouth to run to such an extent that now it was the only thing anyone in Uruk could talk about. If you were to ask anyone in the land, they'd have told you that Gilgamesh had already beaten Humbaba. If he announced now that he was not going, it would be most unbecoming. "You will come back safely, will you not?" The chief elder may as well have been a squeaking mouse in Gilgamesh's shadow. "You must not rely on your strength alone against one such as Humbaba. Be tactical, be strategic, be—" "Oh, what do you know of it?" Gilgamesh shoved him out of the way, and the old man nearly went flying into the wall, if it had not been for Enkidu, who caught the man and set him down as easily as a man might have set down a fallen pot. "Make sure you have the man-beast go in front of you," another elder made himself known, this one keeping a safe distance. "He does know the way to the forest of cedar, after all, and it is a great friend who protects his companion on the road." "He has a name," Gilgamesh grunted. Yes," the elder lowered his head. "Enkidu, was it not?" Enkidu gave half a shrug. Wasn't exactly how you pronounced his name, but it was close enough. "Why, yes." The chief elder was still catching his breath from being thrown. Probably didn't even realize he'd just been saved by Enkidu's quick reactions. "This Enkidu is a very good ally to have. He is tested in battle, it would seem, and he shall keep you safe, no doubt." "Indeed, Enkidu will bring you home safe to all the wives," another chimed in from somewhere. Enkidu liked to think that all that wife-stealing business was over. That was the trigger that had him marching to Uruk in the first place, was it not? It was because Gilgamesh had been such a menace with the wives that Enkidu had stepped in to teach him better. And yes, he had lost, but in that loss he had gained a brother, and Gilgamesh had gained maturity. Besides, he knew how Enkidu felt about the women, and his brother wouldn't do such unspeakable things to them knowing how they made him feel. That much Enkidu was sure of. "We place the king in your hands, Enkidu," said the chief elder, craning his head so far back he was sure the little old man was going to fall over. "Guard him, protect him, and bring him back." Before Enkidu could even agree, Gilgamesh had decided he'd heard enough. "Right, enough of all this sentiment. Come, brother, let us go to the palace sublime and pay my mother, the great Ninsun, a visit. Mother is very clever and wise. She is well versed in, well, everything. She will lend us good counsel." And with that, Gilgamesh took Enkidu by the hand, and the two entered the palace sublime, into the presence of the great queen Ninsun. "Mother?" Gilgamesh started. I'm embarking on a journey to the distant lands, to the wilderness, to the forest of cedar." "I heard," Ninsun said, doing little to hide the irritation in her voice. "There I shall face a battle that I know not. I shall ride a road I know not. I beseech you, therefore, to give me your blessing as I embark on this journey. Let me again see your face in safety, and return glad at heart through Uruk's gate. Let us celebrate New Year's twice over, once when the year begins, and again on the very day that I return home from my quest. Let there be festivals, let there be merriment, let the drums resound in your presence." And Ninsun listened long, and though she did not show it, she was overcome with sadness. Saying nothing to her son, nor the warrior Enkidu, she went to the bathhouse 7 times, where she bathed in the water of tamarisk and soapwort. Then, on the 7th time, she adorned her body in a fine dress, and with jewels and trinkets that could make even the stars seem dull, she presented herself atop the roof of the palace sublime. Scattering incense, she lifted her arms in appeal to the sun god, and said unto him, "Why did you afflict my son Gilgamesh with so restless a spirit? For now you have touched him, and now he will steer his course until he has reached the end, that is, Humbaba. He will face a battle he knows not. He will ride a road he knows not." And as Ninsun spoke, the weather responded. What was only moments ago a quiet and tranquil evening had suddenly turned monstrous and violent. The winds blew against her, the rain pelted around her, and through the clouds did the lightning flow, giving birth to the rumble of thunder. But Ninsun was louder still. "My son will slay the demon Humbaba. He will end the monster's unsightly reign in the wilderness, and he will annihilate from the land the evil thing that you abhor. With that said, as you travel the circuit of this earth, may Aya the bride remind you to entrust to my son the care of the watches of the night. Make for the wild beast man Enkidu the protection of your touch. For where Gilgamesh goes, he will go, and where he goes, Gilgamesh will go. And because Enkidu knows these lands, may you open his path and let no harm come to him. May Aya the bride unfearing remind you. O Shamash, sun god, hear my words. Rouse against Humbaba the mighty gale winds, the south winds, the north winds, the east winds and the west winds, typhoon, hurricane and tempest. Let the weapons of Gilgamesh conquer Humbaba after your very own fires are kindled, and may Aya the bride, unfearing, remind you. Hear me, Shamash, for will not Gilgamesh rank amongst you? Will he not share the heavens with you? Will he not grow wise with Ea? Will he not dwell with Nishida in the land of no return? Steer my boy and his newfound ally through the heart of Humbaba, and let them both return to blessed Uruk stronger and wiser. So says I, Ninsun, the wild cow. Let my words manifest into fate from this night on. Now the gods did not reply, but whilst the winds churned, and the clouds barked with thunder, and lightning scorched the skies, Ninsun knew that Shamash had heard her words. Wiping the rain from her face, Ninsun retreated from the rooftop and made her way back down to the palace sublime. There, her son and the man-beast were still waiting for her. "Mother!" Gilgamesh started towards her. "Was that you shouting on the roof?" Ninsun did not even look at him, for now her eyes were guided towards the other man in the room, the one she'd mistakenly shunned just hours before. Indeed, Enkidu had lost the fight to Gilgamesh and was nowhere near Gilgamesh's strength and power, and yet it was clear to her now that this was to be his other half. It was true that while she had judged him harshly upon her first sight of him, she now knew she could not shun he who had become Gilgamesh's other half. Besides, from what she'd determined, it was Enkidu's calm and wisdom that would see Gilgamesh to the cedar forest and back home again. "Enkidu." Ninsun stalked straight past Gilgamesh and took the man-beast's face in her hands. O mighty Enkidu, you are not sprung from my womb, but henceforth your brood will belong with the votaries of Gilgamesh, the priestesses, the women of the temple. O mighty Enkidu, I did not birth you, but from this day forth you are my son. And with that, she placed her symbols on the wild man's face and neck, and the wild man could hardly hold back the tears, for now he had gained not only a brother, but a mother too. Let the days be long and the nights be short, she told Enkidu. May your loins be grit and your stride be long. Shamash will protect you both during the day, but during the night, you must rest by the campfire. With that, the brothers took each other in arms, and they each performed rituals in accordance with Ninsun's words. And for much of the night, they paid heed to their mother's magic, and spoke words untold to the gods, who watched them from above. By the next morning, Gilgamesh and Enkidu gathered their weapons and prepared to leave for their journey. In Uruk, the whole town had gathered to see the two heroes embark on their journey, and it was with great sadness and yet great enthusiasm did the people of Uruk bid farewell to their king. Now, while we're gone, it is important that there is no foolery happening in the streets. Gilgamesh grabbed hold of the chief elder and pulled him close. Call to account all those who do wrong. Let no one escape punishment for their wrongdoings, and make sure no one sits in my throne. But of course, Gilgamesh. The old man dangled in Gilgamesh's grip, suspended there like some helpless animal caught in a trap. Be sure to take care of things around here, whilst we are plunging our swords into Humbaba's heart, Gilgamesh said, tossing the old man into a bevy of other old men who had gathered to see him off. We will, they all seemed to say at once, calling after him as he marched for the great gates. It's still not too late to change your mind, Enkidu told him as they walked side by side. Behind them, a horde of young men and women rushed to see them off, throwing flowers at them, kissing their feet, adoring them with affection and praise. Gilgamesh smirked. It's written in the stars now, brother. Humbaba is as good as dead. And so they made their way out of the city gates, and Gilgamesh turned and indulged his people. He accepted their gifts, he bathed in their words, he took their hugs and kisses with all the merriment of a man who knew he could not fail. And as far as Enkidu could tell, Gilgamesh was not worried, wasn't the least bit concerned with the quest they had undertaken. In a way, it made him feel like perhaps the days of the demon of the cedar forest were indeed numbered. But then, Enkidu found himself remembering the creature, remembering its gait across the 60 leagues of the wilderness, its fiery speech, and its deathly breath. He glanced back amongst the crowd of onlookers, and there, amongst the midst of them, were the elders, standing as solemnly as men who'd foreseen the bad news already. We place the king in your hands, Enkidu. He heard their words swimming in his ears. Guard him, protect him, and bring him back. Enkidu gave them a furtive nod, and they each gave him a curt lowering of their heads. It was enough to make Enkidu glad that he'd made no promises. Tablet 3 sees our heroes prepare to embark on a most epic yet equally daunting journey. It is in this tablet that we are treated to several details of preparation, from the Council of the Elders, the prayers of Ninsun, and the continued warnings from Enkidu that all cast not just a cautionary air about Gilgamesh, albeit one that is pretty much ignored, but also builds suspense for us, the reader, as to what Gilgamesh is getting himself into. Indeed, the tale aims to paint Gilgamesh as arrogant, unwavering, perhaps even naive for a man who is said to know everything. In a way, it's almost quite typical of modern storytelling, where we see the hero exert this cocky, invincible bravado only to be humbled by his challenges and fashioned into something more wise and likable. Perhaps this is the path of the hero, to go blindly into the abyss with such delusions of grandeur, only to be spat back out with less of the bravado and more of the knowledge. Whilst Tablet 3 is quite specific with us, much of the original text is fragmentary and beyond our complete understanding. We aren't told how long Gilgamesh and Enkidu remained in Uruk, nor are we really told of what they did there. Are we to believe that after their fight, they immediately struck out to go and face off against Humbaba? Or did they hang around for a while, where Gilgamesh was able to indoctrinate Enkidu even further into the life of an Urukian man? As can be determined from Andrew George's translation, much as my own version, it is plausible that Gilgamesh and Enkidu set off on their journey the very next day. Yet because we are never given a time frame, it is also equally possible that Gilgamesh and Enkidu stuck around to revel in feasts and drink all the booze that Uruk had to offer. Remember, Enkidu did have one hell of an appetite. In some ways, it's quite amusing to imagine Gilgamesh and Enkidu competing in sports, where their almost equal levels of strength allows for both men to give the other a decent run for their money. Now that they are friends, it's easy to imagine them in an almost childlike delinquency, inadvertently crushing market stalls and homes and public spaces in an effort to outperform each other. Indeed, one might have sympathy for the everyday citizen, who though had prayed to the gods for a solution to the Gilgamesh problem, had managed to somehow incur a second Gilgamesh. At the very least though, perhaps these two hulking giants kept each other occupied, which meant that the Urukian men who were beaten and exhausted by Gilgamesh were no longer required to fight him. Gilgamesh had Enkidu now, and to go back to wrestling regular men wouldn't have had the same charm anymore. Likewise, it is unclear if Gilgamesh left the wives of the men alone. This, if you remember from the last tablet, was something of a catalyst for Enkidu to leave the peaceful farm he'd come to with Shamhat and to go and fight Gilgamesh. In fact, it's almost as if Enkidu had forgotten that this was his purpose until the young servant informs him that Gilgamesh would take the bride of the husband on the night of her wedding day, for she belonged to him first and her husband second. It is only this that seems to spur Enkidu on, whether this be in the injustice of such an act or some kind of morbid envy on behalf of the man-beast. In my version, I aim to convey Enkidu as being morally mortified that something like this was going on. So by that logic, it would make sense to me that Enkidu would not have stood for it now either. Considering how much Gilgamesh loved Enkidu, it's reasonable to believe that upon hearing Enkidu's concern for this raping of the women, he would have stopped doing it, so as to not hurt his friend's feelings. Interestingly, Andrew George does make slight reference to Gilgamesh's sexual malfeasances, where a priest declares early in the chapter, Enkidu shall bring him safe home to the wives. Perhaps it might be said that the priest was not aware that Gilgamesh had changed, and that he was no longer going to go about stealing people's wives. After all, the subsequent tablets do not make reference to Gilgamesh dabbling in his old ways. Indeed, once he has Enkidu, Gilgamesh essentially becomes a different character, one who doesn't harm or take advantage of his citizens, but rather acts in a manner more expected of a king. On the other hand, you might argue that having lost the fight to Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh continued to enjoy the women on their wedding night, and that Enkidu had no sway over whether Gilgamesh had his way with the women or not. As the tablet doesn't tell us either way, the dichotomy of Gilgamesh is further embroiled in mystery, leading us to continue questioning whether this is a good king or whether he's actually kind of evil. What's interesting is that we aren't the only ones coming to doubt Gilgamesh. In fact, his very own wise men, the elders of Uruk the sheepfold, come to do the very same thing. If you harken back to the narrator in Tablet 1, no one could touch Gilgamesh. In fact, it's reasonable to assume that had Gilgamesh decided to go and fight Humbaba in Tablet 1, no one in Uruk would harbour any uncertainties about him coming back alive. However, now that they'd seen Gilgamesh nearly meet his match with Enkidu in Tablet 2, perhaps they were beginning to see that even the God King himself was fallible, if met with the right foe. It kind of reminds me of the Ivan Vanko line in Iron Man 2, where he remarks, "If you make God bleed, the people will cease to believe in him." And indeed, Enkidu did make Gilgamesh bleed, at least as far as my version goes, and there would likely have been some doubt in the air as to whether Gilgamesh was invincible after all. This is clearly reflected in the words used by the elders, who tell Gilgamesh not to rely on his strength alone, to look long and hard, and to land a blow you can count on. I'm sure that before Enkidu's emergence, they would have told him to just have fun and don't come back too soon. Now though, they are anxious for his safety and his return. They tell Gilgamesh, "Who goes in front saves his companion. Who knows the road protects his friend. Let Enkidu go before you. He knows the way to the forest of cedar." As we can see, they aren't even trusting him to get to the forest, let alone complete the fight. They feel much safer knowing that Enkidu is going with him. But not only this, but that Enkidu is going first. Enkidu is practically leading the way. With this image, it begs the question as to who the hero is here. He is tested in battle and tried in combat. He shall guard his friend and keep safe his companion. They don't do much to preserve the king's ego at all. I mean, is this Gilgamesh's ultimate quest to defeat evil? Or is this just an escort mission for Enkidu? On the one hand, you might say their eagerness to include Enkidu on this mission is simply for extra protection, and that Humbaba is so terrifying and wicked that even Gilgamesh could do with some backup. One thing is for sure though, the people do not trust nor believe in Gilgamesh to complete this mission alone. Much of this goes right over Gilgamesh's head, for in Andrew George's translation, Gilgamesh is not seen to question the elders or take any offense. In my version, I hope to convey Gilgamesh as impatient. He barely acknowledges the elders and sees their input as nothing more but geriatric formality. In Stephen Mitchell's translation, however, it isn't the elders who are doubtful at first, but instead Enkidu, who is actually shown to be crying for Gilgamesh because he believes he will die. Enkidu becomes the voice of reason in this version, but for all his efforts, he is called cowardly by Gilgamesh and encouraged to man up. Later, Enkidu is the one who coerces the elders to bring Gilgamesh to his senses, and when they too echo Enkidu's caution, Gilgamesh just ignores them. Circling back to the idea of whether Gilgamesh is a good king or not, one aspect that may throw the king's alignment under scrutiny is his motivation for killing Humbaba. After all, this idea seems to spring to Gilgamesh's mind most spontaneously, and there doesn't seem to be a compelling reason as to why Humbaba has to die all of a sudden. In its most basic premise, you might say that this is what the hero of an epic does. He slays the monster. The monster doesn't need to have a sympathetic backstory, or a complex set of characteristics that makes them the way they are. They are simply the monster, and they are evil. At first, the Epic of Gilgamesh falls into these constraints, especially if you were to ask the narrator of Tablet 1. Everything is simplified into the notions of good and evil. Gilgamesh is good, Humbaba is evil, and because good always triumphs over evil, Gilgamesh must triumph over Humbaba. However, later on, we quickly learn that this story is much more complex than it lets on, and that the nuances of good and evil aren't so black and white as other epics of the same nature might have you believe. For one, Gilgamesh isn't slaying Humbaba because he is evil, no. Gilgamesh is slaying Humbaba because, well, he wants to be famous. One might argue that Gilgamesh is in fact no better than the youngster on TikTok, doing something unbelievably dangerous and stupid in order to solidify themselves amongst the Hall of Fame of humanity. Not to make the world a better place, not to spread an important message, not to exterminate an evil out of pure selflessness, but instead to be remembered for having done something no one else could or would dare to do. Gilgamesh told Enkidu in Tablet 2, "As for man, his days are numbered. Whatever he may do, it is but wind." This line might seem ordinary in comparison to some of Gilgamesh's other statements, but it's actually quite telling. It shows us that Gilgamesh, for all his physiology being 2/3 divine, probably did deep down consider himself mortal. Yes, whilst his mother was Ninsun, an actual goddess, he was not a god, regardless of how it had been proclaimed throughout all of Uruk. Here, Gilgamesh appears to reconcile that man's days, including his own days, as being numbered. They are finite and ultimately forgotten unless they do something drastic. Here there's vulnerability. Gilgamesh admits, without actually saying the words, that he will die, and that if he died without killing Humbaba, about the most drastic thing in the world at that time, he too would be forgotten. With the severity of his phrasing, to Gilgamesh, this is a fate worse than death. So with that, we learn that killing Humbaba isn't personal. It certainly isn't out of a need to protect his citizens, or to vanquish evil from the world, no. It is for selfish reasons, to be remembered after one's death, to incur a benefit and a privilege that, depending on the reality of life after death, probably can't be enjoyed all that much anyway. Yet this is the only means in which Gilgamesh can transcend death and live forever, and it is a means that he cannot be steered from. With this in mind, the only life Gilgamesh is really saving here is his own, by transcending death. So can we really call him a hero if the only life that he's doing all this for is his own? It's arguable that Enkidu is the more heroic, going in front of Gilgamesh, escorting him through the wilderness, allowing no harm to befall him, and to essentially facilitate his wish coming true. In another light, another motivation for Gilgamesh killing Humbaba isn't something that Gilgamesh decides for himself at all, but rather something he is predisposed to by the will of the sun god Shamash. When we look at the lengthy prayer said by Gilgamesh's mother Ninsun, of which makes up most of the tablet, we see that she accuses Shamash as having placed the idea in Gilgamesh's head. Why did you afflict my son Gilgamesh with so restless a spirit? For now you have touched him, and will tread the distant path to the home of Humbaba. Whether this is the case or not is unknown to us. Is this divine knowledge that only the gods could understand? Or is this the overprotective mother who finds the fault residing in everyone else but her own son? According to her words, Gilgamesh is not a fame-hungry tyrant. No, he's a manipulated victim who's been burdened with this quest by Shamash, a mere instrument in a greater story by the gods. From Ninsun's monologue, it is clear that she believes that what unfolds between her son and the demon Humbaba is a classic example of good against evil. And yet, whilst we've heard all these scandalous things about Humbaba, we haven't seen him do anything evil. Not unlike Gilgamesh, who up until recently had been so bad that his own people had prayed against him. This restless spirit is also something to consider, because maybe Ninsun has a point. We could tell right from the get-go that Gilgamesh is a restless spirit, always challenging the men to the point of exhaustion, taking advantage of the women, ensuing chaos amongst the city that would otherwise prefer tranquility. It was during this time before Enkidu that Gilgamesh was content in this chaos, and his restless spirit seemed to feed on such a lifestyle. Back then, there was no need for anything more, much less was there a need to go and fight something like Humbaba. With Enkidu now in his life, however, we might be correct in assuming that Gilgamesh walked back a lot of his behaviour, denying his basic instincts and thus triggering his restless spirit. Now that Gilgamesh isn't causing terror throughout Uruk, much of the chaos that he once thrived on has become internalized. He has become a pressure cooker on the verge of exploding, and because he is unable to release this built-up energy upon his civilians anymore, or at least has chosen not to, he has redirected his focus upon someone or something else. Unfortunately for Humbaba, this is him. The most ironic thing about this idea is that whilst Uruk is now finally at peace, Gilgamesh couldn't be further from it. Despite the fear of Humbaba that is prevalent amongst the Urukians, and despite the evilness attributed to him by the wild cow Ninsun, we the reader only have their sides of the story. The poet makes no effort to tell us that Humbaba is an immediate threat to society. In fact, it seems plausible that if Humbaba was just left well alone in his forest, he wouldn't have any qualms with the Urukians either. Unlike typical monsters, Humbaba isn't rampaging his way periodically through Uruk, or pouncing on people when they are travelling through the land, but rather is reserved to the forest like some exiled introvert. His speech might be fire and his breath might be death, but from the information available to us, Humbaba has kept well away from humanity. Yet still, Gilgamesh has to kill him. If anything, one might sympathise more with the monster who keeps to himself than sympathise with Gilgamesh who seeks him out. There's no reason to believe that Humbaba was adversarial beyond his terrifying appearance. In fact, he even explains to Enkidu in a later tablet that he is the guardian of the forest, placed there by the gods themselves. Here is a perfect example of the moral complexities of the Epic of Gilgamesh, for though the Urukians would feed us the narrative that Humbaba was wicked, when we actually meet him, we find out he's actually more like a defender of the ecosystem, keeping people out of the forest who, as we know, would sooner tear it all down and probably build all over it. Beyond the aspects of good and evil, we are shown a few little tidbits in this tablet that are worth commenting on. For one, you'll notice that when Gilgamesh heads to the palace to speak with his mother, he tells her that upon his return, they will celebrate New Year twice over. Now, this might seem like a hyperbole to exemplify the scale of the celebration upon Gilgamesh's return, but it actually did come to transpire in Uruk, where the New Year festival, known as Atiku, was celebrated over the course of several days. We also see a more heartwarming moment in Tablet 3, where Ninsun comes to accept Enkidu as her own son. You might remember in the previous tablet, Enkidu actually breaks down and starts crying when he is essentially shunned by Ninsun. But after having convened with the gods and recognizing the love he has for her son, she has no choice but to be compelled into recognizing him as her own. While she does charge him with keeping Gilgamesh safe and returning home, she comes across as far more encouraging and treats him akin to the same level of adoration matched by the other Urukians. "Oh, mighty Enkidu, you are not sprung from my womb, but henceforth your brood will belong with the votaries of Gilgamesh." One of the most interesting things I took away from this tablet, beyond Ninsun's prayer itself, is the vulnerability of Gilgamesh. Suddenly, in the Palace Sublime, this is not a man who rules a nation with unyielding authority, but instead, a boy seeking the counsel of his mother. In fact, Gilgamesh even acknowledges, "I shall tread, O Ninsun, bold as I am, the distant path to the home of Humbaba. I shall face a battle I know not." This is one of the first signs of Gilgamesh's more human side. With this remark, we get an insight into his psyche and how, on some level, as specified earlier, he knows the whole two-third divine property is pretty much just fictional fluff, a sentiment that makes him seem more powerful than he actually is. In truth, Gilgamesh has doubts, he has concerns, and it isn't beyond him to go running home to Mummy. You'll notice in the subsequent stanza, he actually requires her blessing to go on his journey. "I beseech you, give me your blessing as I go on my journey." Indeed, you might say that this was Gilgamesh, he who was two-thirds divine, the king of all Uruk, who knew everything and was the strongest one there was, asking his mother permission to leave the house. Another notable part of the tablet focuses around just how Ninsun reacts to hearing the news that her son, her only son, is about to go on what is essentially a suicide mission. George's translation tells us that Ninsun listens long and with sadness, as any mother might have, and that after she had heard him speak, she did not respond at all, but rather went to the bathhouse 7 times. As we've noted in previous episodes, 7 is a reoccurring number within the poem. Enkidu slept with the harlot Shamhat for 7 nights before he was civilized. Enkidu drank 7 jugs of beer. The gates of Uruk themselves were 7-fold. The original poet seemed to be fond of the number 7, and for whatever reason, 7 in these instances dictates some form of success or progression. Perhaps it was a lucky number, and Ninsun's obsessive bathing was not a moment of madness, but actually a deliberate effort to heed superstition. After all, she was about to commune with Shamhash and plead with him to give her son his blessing and protection. As already mentioned, Ninsun blames Shamash for Gilgamesh's quest in the first place, believing that the god had somehow instilled this notion in him, and that this was delivering him to an early grave. So as to make sure this is not the case, Ninsun doesn't miss a beat during her prayer. It does go on for about 3 pages. She mentions Aya the bride, who is Shamash's wife, as a means to almost threaten Shamash, that should he forget about Gilgamesh, then may his wife, the unfearing, remind him. While some praise is offered to Shamash, most notably how he brings forth the sun every day, and how the Anunnaki await his brilliance, most of Ninsun's efforts are to ensure that Gilgamesh's road is made for safety, or that Enkidu is touched, or that each man bears a torch for the journey and gets enough sleep whenever night falls. More pressingly, she asks Shamash to spare Gilgamesh no disadvantage. She invokes the god to send the south winds, north winds, east winds, west winds, blasts, counterblasts, typhoons, hurricanes, storms, pretty much any harsh weather condition against Humbaba. In this, it becomes clear that the goddess doesn't care if Gilgamesh kills Humbaba fairly. In fact, most of Uruk don't seem to mind either, as they insist Enkidu goes first, so long as Gilgamesh returns safely. The honour and glory of a fair fight might be paramount to Gilgamesh, but to everyone else, the dangerous feat isn't as necessary as Gilgamesh seems to think it is. Lastly, Ninsun makes some rather bold promises, though maybe only she as a goddess could have known. She says that if she is heard and her son is victorious, then Shamash will have a restful seat or bed, and that all the gods will bring him food, and his wife will clean his face and pamper him. Was this a wishful bluff on behalf of Ninsun? Maybe. After all, I can't imagine the likes of Enlil taking too kindly to bringing Shamash food and swooning over some mortal. Enlil had tried to drown all the humans once upon a time, and clearly despised them. Why would he be grateful that Shamash had helped save one, even if it was Gilgamesh? To better understand, some readers argue that this was a level of divine politics that we are not able to grasp, and that the reason why Ninsun makes these promises is because she truly believed that they would transpire, or that she knew how to manipulate Shamash into doing her bidding. After this, Ninsun proclaims that despite his mortality, Gilgamesh is the sort of man who is so great that he will be remembered as divine, particularly if he slays Humbaba. With that in mind, Ninsun asks Shamash, "O Shamash, will not Gilgamesh rank with the gods? Will he not share the heavens with you? Will he not share with the moon a scepter and crown? Will he not grow wise with Ea of the ocean below? Will he not rule with Urnina, the black-headed people? Will he not dwell with Ningishida in the land of no return?" Ninsun attempts to sell the idea of Gilgamesh being divine in these verses. Indeed, he wasn't just some mortal man who needed help with a trivial matter, no. He was a man who could very well join their ranks once his mortal life was over. George's translation tells us that after Ninsun is satisfied with her prayer, it's interesting to note that she doesn't actually get a reply from Shamash here, that the tablet becomes badly fractured. Whilst George is able to pick out some details of rituals being performed with Gilgamesh and Enkidu present, the exact nature of these rituals or what they look like remain a mystery to us. When the text resumes, Gilgamesh is seen to be giving instructions to the elders as to how the city should be run in his absence. By the end of the tablet, there is uneasy support for Gilgamesh's venture. The elders are concerned. Enkidu is wary, And the young men, well, for the most part, the young men mirror Gilgamesh's naive and rash attitude, perhaps a reflection of their youth and inexperience. Whatever the case, Gilgamesh and Enkidu leave the city of Uruk behind them, with only one goal set firmly ahead of them: to kill a demon. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode on the Epic of Gilgamesh, then don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.